Are there any questions? The Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. President, my question without notice is to the Minister for Roads, Maritime and Freight. Following the release of the confidential Newcastle port commitment documents revealing the details of caps and penalties applying to container movements, will you now admit that your government's port privatisation will restrict Newcastle's economic development for the next 100 years?
Very good question.
And that you said there are no caps.
So, Mr. President, will I admit, what was it?
Your government's port privatisation will restrict Newcastle's economic development for the next 100 years.
No, absolutely not. Never, ever. Never, ever. We have done more for Newcastle than any other government in the last decade. Gone is the day when the Labor Party got the votes out of Newcastle and left Newcastle to be a rust belt. Mr. President, we are working to encourage and fix up Newcastle. As the government has consistently said, the leasing terms of Botany and Port Kembla do not prohibit the development of a container terminal at the Port of Newcastle. In fact, there is ample opportunity for increased container trade at the port. Now, Mr. President, this is the important part that they don't understand. The port transaction needs do not trigger any cross payments until a threshold container throughput is reached. That threshold is based on 30,000 containers each year, plus an extra 6% growth in volume each year. So that's compound. So you've got 30,000 plus 6% each year compound.
Does it have any cap?
Now,
Why have any cap?
in a moment we'll get to where it is now, Mr. President. Based on current growth rates, it's highly unlikely current container trade in Newcastle will reach the applicable threshold before such time as Newcastle is required to establish high-intensity container terminals to meet the forecasted population and business needs of the hunter. Yearly trade at Newcastle, Mr. President, is currently at a steady 9,000 containers. In other words, it would take a massive 230% increase in container trade volume just to reach the 30,000 TEU threshold. So that's where it is now. It's at 9,000. It can go to 30,000. That's a 230% increase to get to that. And you still haven't taken the 6% compound that comes each year, Mr. President. So I don't know, they've had the Cuisenaire rods out, Mr. President, but they haven't been adding up properly. Mr. President, what rods?
Cuisenaire rods.
Cuisenaire rods. Yeah, it's what grandfather would have used to do his arithmetic in days gone by, Mr. President.
He still writes with a quill.
At least he's got a desk.
Mr. President, indeed, when you apply the formula to the outer years, by 2030 the threshold at Newcastle will be approximately 80,000 boxes, by 2040 144,000 boxes, and by 2050 it will be almost 260,000 boxes. Port of Newcastle will continue to be New South Wales' primary coal export facility and will continue to diversify into bulk grain and other commodities including fuel. The New South Wales Government engaged closely with the ACCC and other regulatory bodies as part of these transactions. Mr. President, Port Botany remains the key container facility for New South Wales for a range of logistical and commercial reasons.
And it's just,
Supplementary question.
the Leader of the Opposition has a supplementary question.
Mr. President, I'd ask the Minister to elucidate, given his answer, could he please elucidate on why the port commitment documents have the container terminal cap in place in the first place?
Thank you. I really appreciated that. It's good to work together. I was
Working together.
got to the key stuff, Mr. President. About 85% of the imported containers landing at Port Botany are distributed within 40 to 50 kilometres of the terminal gates, namely to warehouses, distribution centres and freight hubs in Western and South-Western Sydney. This is the key to this, Mr President. We're not running a cargo cult in New South Wales. If the stuff's going into Sydney, it should come to Sydney. We're not going to pay people to be clogging up the M1 and the infrastructure of the rail between Newcastle and Sydney to send something up in some form of inverse cargo cult into Newcastle to come back. That is something the Labor Party did, Mr President. You remember when they decided they'd move the cars out of Sydney and send them to Port Kembla? I was the Shadow Minister at the time, and I went around as a very diligent Shadow Minister, and I found that they had a parking lot on Glebe Island. So those black BMWs that went down to Port Kembla were then put on a truck and brought back to Sydney, because that's where they were sold. Those rich Labor supporters in the eastern suburbs, the Labor Party, that's where they were. So that was just the wrong thing to do. What we need to do is to develop Newcastle, and there is a huge scope for development in niche areas to be able to provide for the Hunter region. It's a great port, and it will be even better, and it's made that way because we're making sensible, grown-up decisions in this state. We're not running cargo cults like the Labor Party.